My coworker said, the early bird gets the worm, so I became the earliest bird she'd ever seen. And the worm she was trying to get was my promotion. My coworker Diane has been at the company for 6 years. I have been here for 2. She sits 3 desks from me in an open plan office that was designed by someone who believed proximity breeds collaboration, when what it actually breeds is surveillance with plausible deniability. Diane watches everything I do. She watches when I arrive. She watches when I leave. She watches my screen when she walks past to the printer. She once commented that my salad was ambitious for a Tuesday, which is a sentence I still think about at 3 a.m. when my brain decides sleep is less important than cataloging things people have said to me that do not make sense. The promotion opened in January. Senior analyst. My manager Vaughn told me privately, your numbers are the best on the team. Your client retention is 23% above average. The role is yours to lose. Yours to lose. A phrase that sounds like a guarantee and functions as a warning. Diane found out. She has a professional intelligence network that operates with the efficiency of a Cold War listening station. She knew about the promotion before it was posted. Diane came to my desk on a Wednesday. She said, you know, the early bird gets the worm. Vaughn notices who's here first. It shows commitment. She said it as advice. The way a person drops a suggestion that is actually a strategy they have already implemented and are offering to you as misdirection. She wanted me to show up early so she could show up earlier. A visibility arms race. An attendance competition that would exhaust me and demonstrate that dedication is measured in minutes before 8 a.m. rather than results after it. I said, that's a great point, Diane. Thank you. Then I became the earliest bird she had ever seen. The next morning I arrived at 5:45 a.m. The office opens at 6. Nobody arrives before 7:15. I was at my desk with the lights on and a coffee in my hand, and my reports already printed by the time the security guard Callum did his walkthrough at 6:10. He said, I've been doing this for 12 years and nobody has ever been here before me. Diane arrived at 7:05. Her personal record. She saw me. She saw the coffee. She saw the printed reports. She said, how long have you been here? I said, a while. The next morning I arrived at 5:30. Diane arrived at 6:50. She was adjusting, but the math was against her because I was willing to go earlier than any reasonable person would go, and her strategy only worked if she could arrive before me, and she could not because I had removed reason from the equation entirely. By week 2, I was arriving at 5:15. Callum and I were on a first-name basis. He brought me coffee once. I brought him a donut. We had a routine. Diane was arriving at 6:30 and looking increasingly exhausted because the arms race she started required her to sacrifice sleep, and the sleep she was sacrificing was affecting her work, and the work she was producing was declining while my work was unchanged because arriving early did not change my output. I did the same work I always did. I just did it in a building that was dark and empty and peaceful and honestly kind of wonderful. Vaughn noticed. Not the arrival times, the output. He said, Diane's numbers have dropped 8%. Your numbers are up. What changed? I said, I'm focused. Diane was focused too. On the clock, on the parking lot, on being first through the door. She had shifted her entire professional identity from doing the work to being seen doing the work, and the being seen was consuming the doing. By week 3, Diane looked like she had not slept in days. Her client calls were sloppy. She double booked a meeting with 2 VIP accounts and one escalated to Vaughn. Vaughn pulled me into his office on a Friday. He said, I'm making the promotion decision next week. Your performance this quarter has been exceptional. He said, I also want you to know that arrival time has never been a factor in any promotion decision I've made. I don't know why Diane thinks I'm monitoring the parking lot. I'm not. I'm monitoring results. I said, I've been here since 5 a.m. every day for 3 weeks. He said, I know. Security logs everything. I said, I like the quiet. He said, at 5 a.m.? I said, the fluorescent lights don't buzz when nobody else is here. It's the only time this office feels like a place where thinking is possible. He said, the promotion is yours. Not because you showed up early, because you outperformed every metric by double digits while someone else was busy racing you to the door. Diane found out on Monday. She came to my desk. She said, you got it because you played games. I said, I got it because of my numbers. You told me the early bird gets the worm. You were right. But the worm wasn't the parking lot. It was the work. Vaughn told me during the promotion meeting. I want to be transparent. Diane came to me 3 weeks ago. She showed me the security logs. She highlighted your arrival times and hers. She presented a spreadsheet comparing our dedication metrics. She built a spreadsheet to prove she was more committed than you based on minutes in the building. He said, she spent 3 weeks building a spreadsheet about a parking lot instead of building the client portfolio I asked for in January. That spreadsheet is the reason the decision was easy. Diane went silent for 2 weeks. I settled into the senior analyst role. My friend Lorcan, who works on a different floor, said, you earned this. Don't let anyone make you feel weird about it. Then small things started happening. A client meeting I had scheduled disappeared from the shared calendar. Not moved, gone. The system log showed it had been deleted but did not show who deleted it. I rescheduled from scratch. It cost me half a morning and made me look disorganized in front of a client I had just taken over. 2 days later, a file I prepared for Vaughn's weekly review came back missing the regional forecast data sheet. He said, this is the second time this month something came through incomplete. Just double check before you send. His voice was patient, which was almost worse because patience from your manager means they are giving you the benefit of the doubt, and the benefit of the doubt has a limit. I pulled up the sent email. I had attached the data sheet. It was not there now. I knew I had attached it. I am careful about attachments because I have been careful about attachments my entire career. Around the same time, Diane became the nicest person on the floor. She brought pastries from the bakery down the street in a pink box with a ribbon. She volunteered to help other analysts with their reports. She remembered names of partners and birthdays of children. It was a performance. Every pastry was a brick in a wall she was building. She was making herself the most likable person, so that when I raised a concern, I would look like the problem. The paranoid new senior analyst who cannot handle a coworker being nice. Then Lorcan pulled me aside. He said, people in my department are asking if it's true you gamed the promotion. Someone's been saying you manipulated Vaughn by showing up early on purpose to make Diane look bad, like the whole thing was a strategy to sabotage her. He said, the version they're hearing is really specific, like someone sat down and crafted a story. Diane was running a campaign, building goodwill with the team while feeding a story to people outside our department, setting up a version where she was the loyal 6 6-year employee beaten by a newcomer who played dirty, and she was doing it so carefully that there was nothing I could point to and say, this is what she's doing. What was I going to report? That she brought pastries? That people were talking? I started documenting everything. A private folder on my personal drive, screenshots with timestamps, the deleted calendar entry, the sent email showing my original attachment, notes about what Lorcan told me and when. But while I was quietly building a folder, Diane was loudly building a narrative, and narratives move faster than folders. Monday morning, Callum was standing at the security desk when I arrived. He said, your coworker came in yesterday, Sunday, spent about 4 hours here. He said, she was at your desk for a while. She said she was borrowing a stapler. He shifted his weight. He said, I don't think it was about a stapler. I walked to my desk. Everything looked the same. Chair pushed in, pen holder in place. You do not carefully replace someone's things unless you know you did something you should not have while you were there. 3 of my client files had been modified. The revision dates showed Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m., 2:47 p.m., 3:15 p.m. The modifications were not obvious. That was the scary part. In the first file, numbers in a client projection had been changed, just enough to make the forecast wrong. In the second, contact information for 2 key accounts had been altered. 2 digits swapped in a phone number, 1 letter changed in an email address. In the third, a decimal point in a revenue forecast had been shifted 1 place to the right. A projection that should have read 47,000 now read 470,000. All 3 files, if sent without review, would have looked like my errors. Sloppy, careless mistakes from a new senior analyst who was not ready. From someone promoted too fast. I fixed every number. I restored every contact. I moved the decimal back. And I took a screenshot of every modification, every revision timestamp, every piece of evidence that these files were changed on a Sunday when I was not in this building. My hands were shaking. This was not about Diane being petty. She was trying to get me fired. She was creating a pattern of mistakes that would make Vaughn question his decision. She came into this building on a Sunday. She sat at my desk. She changed numbers with the precision of someone who had thought about this for a long time. And then she put my stapler back exactly where she found it. That afternoon, Vaughn called a team meeting. At the end, he asked if anyone had anything else. Diane raised her hand. She stood up with a printout, highlighted sections. She said, I took some time this weekend to run a quality audit on some of our recent client files. I found errors in 3 files. She named my 3 files. She walked through each error like she was surprised by them. The wrong numbers, the swapped contacts, the decimal. She shook her head like she was sad about it. She said, I'm not trying to call anyone out. I just think since we have a new senior analyst, we should make sure our standards haven't slipped. Vaughn looked at me. He was waiting to see how I would respond. I almost spoke. But Diane had spent weeks building a reputation as the nicest person on the floor. If I accused her of tampering without showing proof in front of the whole team, I would look exactly the way she wanted. Defensive, paranoid. A new senior analyst who cannot handle quality feedback. I said nothing. I nodded. The meeting ended. Diane collected her printouts with a small, satisfied smile. I waited 10 minutes. Then I walked to Vaughn's office and closed the door. I said, those 3 files Diane flagged, they were modified on Sunday at 2 p.m., 2:47 p.m., and 3:15 p.m. I wasn't in the building on Sunday. Someone was. I showed him the revision timestamps. Then I showed him the security log confirming Diane signed into the building on Sunday afternoon and spent nearly 4 hours there. He said, why didn't you say this in the meeting? I said, because I wanted to show you evidence, not make an accusation without proof. That's not how I operate. He said, don't share this with anyone else yet. Let me look into it. 2 days passed. Vaughn said nothing. Meanwhile, Diane was acting like the team meeting had been a win. She hummed at her desk. She volunteered for a cross-department project. Then Lorcan pulled me into the stairwell. He said, Diane filed an HR complaint against you yesterday. She's claiming you created a hostile work environment by intentionally starting the early arrival competition to humiliate her. Targeted harassment. Hostile work environment. Targeted harassment. Those are the words that go into files. The words that trigger investigations. The words that show up in meetings with people whose entire job is to decide who is the problem. And Diane had just told them the problem was me. An HR complaint meant an investigation. Interviews with coworkers who had been hearing Diane's version for weeks. The version where I was the calculating newcomer. Those coworkers would answer based on the only information they had. The information Diane had been feeding them over pastries and pivot tables. And an investigation meant the promotion could be paused or reversed. I had been playing defense, quietly collecting, carefully saving. Diane had been playing offense, loudly, publicly, fast. She was 3 moves ahead and I was still organizing screenshots by date. The next morning, Diane walked over to my desk at 7:30 and sat on the edge of it. She said, I know things have been tense. I want to apologize. I was jealous about the promotion. I handled it badly. Can we start over? Her voice was warm. Her expression was open. She looked like someone who meant it. Then she said, I just wish you'd told me upfront that the early arrival thing was strategy. I felt humiliated. If you could just acknowledge that to HR, I think we can put this whole thing behind us. The apology was not an apology. It was a delivery system. Everything before that sentence was packaging. Inside the box was a request for me to walk into HR and say, it was a strategy, which would validate everything in her complaint. It would turn her accusation into my confession. I said, I came in early because I like the quiet. There was no strategy. Something behind her eyes went from warm to flat. The next morning, Vaughn sent me a calendar invite. Private meeting. Conference room with the door that actually closes. 3 names. Mine, Diane's, and someone from HR. I walked in at 10 a.m. Diane was already seated. The HR representative had a notepad and a face that gave away nothing. Vaughn opened a folder. He said, I've completed my review. I want to address everything at once. He started with the HR complaint. He said, Diane, you filed a complaint alleging the early arrival pattern constituted targeted harassment. I reviewed the security logs for the full 3-week period. He pulled out a printed timeline. 2 colors. He said, on day 1, you arrived at 7:05. She arrived at 5:45. On day 2, you arrived at 6:50. She arrived at 5:30. You escalated your arrival times every single day in response to hers. She maintained a consistent schedule. The pattern shows you were the one competing. She just showed up and worked. Diane said, she did it on purpose. office. She admitted. I said, I never admitted anything. You came to my desk yesterday and asked me to tell HR my early arrivals were strategy. I said no, because it wasn't true. The HR representative wrote something down. Vaughn said, now let's talk about the files. He pulled out revision logs. He said, 3 client files were modified on Sunday afternoon. She was not in the building. You were, Diane. Security confirms you entered at 1:40 p.m. and left at 5:12 p.m. The security guard noted you spent time at her desk. Diane said, I was borrowing supplies. I didn't touch her files. Vaughn said, the modifications were made from your login credentials. You logged into her workstation using your own network access. IT confirmed it this morning. The room went so quiet I could hear the air through the vent. Diane said, that has to be an error. Vaughn said, it's not. He let the silence sit. Then he said, you modified her files to introduce errors. Then you presented those errors in a team meeting as evidence of declining quality. You manufactured a problem so you could publicly present yourself as the solution. Diane said nothing. Vaughn said, I'm recommending a formal investigation into data tampering and misuse of company systems. I'm also recommending Diane's complaint be dismissed. The HR representative nodded and wrote. Vaughn turned to Diane. His voice got quieter, not angry, almost sad. He said, I've been your manager for 4 years. You're a capable analyst when you focus on the work, but you stopped focusing on the work a long time ago. Diane picked up her bag. She walked out of the conference room without a word. Vaughn turned to me. He said, you handled this exactly right. You documented everything. You didn't retaliate. You came to me with evidence instead of accusations. He paused. The promotion stands, and I owe you an apology for not acting faster when you first brought this to me. I walked back to my desk. The office was normal. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking. Nobody knew what had just happened. Callum walked by and stopped at my desk. He set a coffee down next to my keyboard. He said, 5 a.m. crew sticks together. I laughed. The first real laugh in weeks. At lunch, Lorcan texted, how'd it go? I typed back, the worm was the work. It was always the work. Diane's desk was empty for the rest of the week. I opened my client files, checked the numbers, and started building the portfolio Vaughn had asked for. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I did not mind them as much anymore. I earned my seat. And I know now that earning it was the easy part. Keeping it means being willing to protect it. I am.